Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Roadmap to Accessibility webinar with myself and Tras and Jess are here to assist. And today we'll be talking about the process of making sure that all our products, our digital products at least, are accessible to people with disabilities. And we're going to talk through all the things that we need to have in place just to make sure that that happens. My name is Grant Broom. I'm director at Dig Inclusion and at Nile HQ. I've got 20 years in the digital accessibility industry. So I started out as an accessibility champion for a web accessibility company, and I've been doing it ever since. And which is interesting because I wanted to be a 3D animator. That was my career choice when I was out of uni. But I found out about accessibility. I found out that it was an important thing for our society, and it was something that I just seemed to click with and enjoy, and I've been doing it ever since. I founded Dig Inclusion in 2012 with 3 other directors. I'm the only remaining director, and joined Nile Group in 2023 when Dig Inclusion was acquired by Nile. So yeah, we've got, the great thing about that is that Dig has now in a sense expanded. So we've got a lot of really good talent at Nile, and it's a really fantastic organization. And if you're interested in finding out more about them, you can go to nilehq.com and see what they do. So just a quick slide on our clients. So I'll read them out. We've got Home Office, NHS, Department for Work and Pensions, the Pensions Regulator, Moonpig, Metrobank, Shawbrook, WillPay, Legal & General, Samaritans, Premier League, Tesco, Department for Transport, and Talk Mobile. So we've got quite an array of clients there. Some of them are private, some of them are public clients, some of them are charities. So we don't really deliver accessibility just to one sector. We deliver it to all sectors. The only requirement is that you need some accessibility help at your organization. So I was going to have a slide on statistics here, but I figured that is just only one that you need to know, and that is that most sites aren't accessible. There's been plenty of surveys done checking the accessibility of websites, and most of them come back to say that the vast majority of websites are inaccessible. Now, that might mean that your site is inaccessible. I could tell you from 20 years of auditing that I can probably count on one hand the amount of sites that we've tested as a first off, and they've just come back with a pass, and they've got no accessibility issues at all. Now, that's not to say that all sites have terrible accessibility. Accessibility is variable across sites. So some sites are very bad, and they don't even have some of the fundamentals in there, but lots of the majority of sites aren't like that anymore, thankfully, but there are some probably lesser issues that need to be thought about. And the thing about accessibility now in most countries is that it's a legal requirement and you have to meet a certain standard. That standard is, generally speaking, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, now in version 2.2. So if you're trying to generate a website that you need to be accessible to the most amount of people, then that's the standard you'd be looking for. And it's like I said, it's a legal requirement in most countries, and most sites aren't meeting that. So here's a roadmap to help you get to where you need to be from a legal, but also a moral and ethical perspective. Talking about legal requirements, there's a new EU Accessibility Act coming out next year. Actually, it's already out, but it's in force next year. So in June 2025, if you're selling services to the EU, so you don't need to just be part of the EU. You can be outside the EU, you could be any other country. If you're selling services into the EU, they must comply with the EU Accessibility Act. And that means that, again, they have to comply with WCAG 2.2 accessibility guidelines. Those are the current guidelines. And there are penalties if you're products don't do that. We won't go into the nitty-gritty of that, but it's just a note to say that next year, if you've got any product selling into the EU, if you've got a website to support it, any digital assets that support that product, then they have to be accessible and they have to comply with guidelines. So no more vagaries about whether something's accessible or not. There are guidelines out there that you can follow, and you need to meet them to make sure that you can sell into the EU. Okay, so when I was putting the slides together, there were two things on my mind. The first one was the familiar product life cycle. Where do we put accessibility into the life cycle? How do we start introducing accessibility into when we're creating products? There was that, and then there was a bigger piece which I'll come on to, which talks about how the product life cycle is just one is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more to it than that, and we'll explore those in later slides. But I just wanted to tick this off just so that it didn't look like I was skipping over this very important part of the puzzle. So normally when we're working with clients who want to start building accessibility into their products, there's an engagement cycle. So engagement part of the cycle. So they'll come to us and they will say, hey, we've got this product we launch in, or we've got a product that we're not sure about the accessibility, or we've got a legacy product. We need to understand what we need to do to make this accessible and compliant. So we'll go through a consultation phase where we'll talk with that client and we'll explore the product. We'll have a look at the scope of the product. We'll come up with a schedule of works, and we'll propose how we go about making that product more accessible. As always, there's a testing phase. So most of what we do at Dig Inclusion is testing. So we test. We've tested thousands of websites. We've probably encountered hundreds of thousands of different issues and passed those on with help and support to the client so that they can start making their products better. Very important phase mixed in with the remediate phase. So whenever we test something, we're going to find issues. As I said earlier, there's rare occasions where we'll test a website and it's perfectly accessible from the get-go. So we'll find something, we'll pass that back to the development team, we'll support them in remediating those issues, and then we test again. And then hopefully we get to the end goal, which is to release that product. And that can go out into the internet and it's fully accessible and there's no issues with it. We will then go through, it's not on the slides, but a maintenance phase where we will periodically check in on that product, or if there are any major changes or updates, then we'll go back to the product then and we'll take another look and make sure that the integrity of that product from the accessibility perspective is maintained. Okay, so that was a piece of the puzzle. I would probably put that in test and measure, but there's a whole bunch of other things that we need to do to make sure that our products are accessible. And I'm going to go through each one of these in detail, but it's really important to take this whole picture in, that accessibility isn't just about testing and passing. That is... I mean, it's important and it's part of it, but without these other steps of the process, then you're going to find that part really, really difficult indeed. So let's drill down and have a look at some of these. So I'm in the middle of writing an article on inclusive culture. And it was born out of a conversation that I had with a client, and we were talking about kind of challenges that we had in work. New client, we'd never met before, and kind of I think we just had a long day, and our guards came down, and we started talking like a couple of friends in the pub. And what we realized then, or what we discussed, is a term that maybe a lot of you haven't heard of, is masking. So when people have a disability, even if it's very mild, like I've got ADHD, or if it's something that's probably more prominent, more obvious to other people, like a physical disability, then when we're in the workspace, we tend to kind of pretend that there's nothing wrong. And that's because we might be working within a culture where it's kind of we like to think that we're an inclusive culture. We like to think that we don't have prejudices, but these things exist within our workspace, and we try to pretend that they're not there. And that's tiring. You know, a lot of the people that work at Dig Inclusion, we've got a very inclusive culture. We've got a lot of neurodiversity. We've got some physical disability, and we try to let people just be themselves. And it's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of time and understanding, but just understanding that people are so different from one another and that their needs are so different is very, very important. And not trying to be clones of each other or of the boss or the leadership. And it's quite a difficult thing to achieve. You know, it takes a long time, or you can just start early on within the development of your company and just build it in from scratch. But you have to have it to be able to succeed in creating inclusive products. You have to have an inclusive culture, or at the very least, it makes things so much easier. And the other thing about an inclusive culture is that it just brings so much stuff with it. So on the screen, I've got a picture of a guy. The picture was on the screen earlier, the introduction screen. It's actually two guys, and they're making a cup of coffee at a coffee machine in an office. And we don't see that very much. We don't see a lot of disability within office or workspace. And given that, you know, 1 in 5 or even 1 in 4 people have a disability, it's mind-boggling to think that we don't recognize it at all, that we don't talk about it, that it's dismissed. People don't talk about their needs. And we don't seem to have a representative work environment, or one that represents the real world. And that's quite interesting. And the things that we can do about that through employment, through, I suppose, a permissiveness within a work environment, so people can talk about disability and their needs, and it's normalized. I think that's really, really important. So just to summarize, culture drives commitment in an organization. So if people live in accessibility, if they live in inclusion, if they've got friends and colleagues that have a disability, and they talk about their disabilities, and it's open and people feel comfortable doing that, then people will be committed to each other in the organization and then out to the wider community. So culture has a load of benefits that are going to be felt long term. A more diverse culture gives you better products. And this is because people with a variety of different needs who are able to express these needs will be able to express those needs when it comes down to a product. So they may say something like, the text is really small for me to read, or they might say something like the color contrast is bad, or I might need to access via a keyboard, or my screen reader doesn't work really very well with this interface. So if you've got those things going in your organization and they're part of your design team, they're part of your dev team and your leadership team, then that is just going to give you better products, because people are thinking about their own experience when they're building products for others. Diversity mirrors society. So we have quite a large populace of people with disabilities within the UK or within the world, and we need to recognize that. We need to understand that if we got workplace culture that's diverse, then that is just the same as society, and we can have more empathy and have more things in common with wider society, rather than living in our our silos like we do sometimes of ableism. So that's a really important point to remember as well, that if we've got lots of diversity, then that's just representing our customers. Find champions in your organization. I started out as an accessibility champion within the organization. And the great thing about accessibility champions, they're quite common now within organizations, is that they make sure that people know what they're doing. They share articles, they might do lunch and learn sessions within your organizations. But the most important thing is that they generate the conversation, that people keep talking about accessibility, that it's always on the agenda, it never slips off. So a good accessibility champion will always be challenging what's being built, what's being said, and always bringing the conversation back to accessibility and inclusion. Is this product inclusive? Will it work for the most amount of people possible? So the next point is leadership buy-in. You need a strong commitment from the business to make this work. So key thing here is that if you're in a leadership position within your organization, it's your duty to make sure that your culture, your environment, and your products are accessible. If your team are fighting you on this, or if you're not prioritizing it or not giving it the airtime that it needs, your products are going to suffer and your team are going to suffer. And if you are not in a leadership role, but you want to promote accessibility inclusion upwards within the organization, then the best way to do that is just to keep the conversation going. Make sure that you're always talking about it. Don't give up. Don't let your guard down. And I know that's a lot on you if you sound like the only voice within the organization that's talking about accessibility, but you will eventually get through and people will start to listen. Just keep it on the forum. Make sure that you're doing what you can. I mean, don't burn yourself out. I mean, that is a danger, but just do what you can to make sure that it's always part of the conversation. So to summarize that, people will follow what you do. So do the right thing. Be a good leader. Be a good representation of the organization, the values, and the commitment to customers. Make sure that that is all part of what you do and that it's just a part of your everyday thinking, and people will follow that. People will look at what you're doing and they will want to mimic that if you're a good leader. To get leadership buy-in, keep having the conversation. Don't let it slip. Always talk about accessibility. Always bring it into the conversation. Build an inclusive culture around you and let it spread and work its way up. So if you're not in a leadership position, this is the best thing that you can do. Build your own little silo of inclusivity. Get people on board with you, and that will eventually spread upwards. Training. So I remember talking to someone in a conference about accessibility, and they said accessibility, it's not rocket science, is it? And I was deeply offended. And this was one of those, these overlay vendors. So those pieces of software that just sit on your browser and you can click them and it's supposed to make your site accessible. They don't work, by the way. And I thought that was such an inaccurate way of describing accessibility, because it belittles the level of commitment and the knowledge and the dedication needed to make something accessible. So if you look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for example, to get to the minimum standard of accessibility required by most legal institutions, you're looking at 50 different guidelines, and they are not straightforward to understand and to implement. So, as a testing team, we have life easy in a sense, in that we don't necessarily have to fix things. I mean, we have fixed things and we do help people fix things, but our job necessarily is just to find those issues and give those back to the client and help them remediate them. When we take on a recruit within Dig Inclusion, a tester, it's about 6 months before they're allowed to test a product as a lead. So up until that point, they'll have had training, they'd have gone through accessibility workshops, they'd have been shadowing their peers, they'd have been working with a mentor, they'd have been testing maybe some of the easy guidelines to start off with, like does this an alternative text for an image, so that blind people using screen readers can have that read back to them. Does that alt text represent that image in the right way? They'll be looking at headings to see whether they're marked up in HTML, etc., etc. So all these, I probably made them sound complicated, but these are more of the simple criteria within accessibility. And we build that up over time. and we're patient, and we handhold people until it's about 6 months before we feel people are competent to take a lead on accessibility testing. We always peer review. We always do quality assurance at the end of our test as well, to make sure that any nuances of accessibility haven't been missed, but it takes a while. So to expect your team to be able to produce accessible content after a training session, an hour lunch and learn or something like that, that's a big ask. And what you should expect is that accessibility will be implemented over time. People need time to learn, find out about these nuances, solidify their learning and their knowledge, and then start to deliver accessible products. So you'll see a curve of things improving over time. But training is really, really important to start off with, just to set that scene, just to let people know the scope or the size of the project ahead of them, just in understanding how to make something accessible. So accessibility is hard. People don't know what to do. Provide training and give people time to practice it. There you go. Oh, there is a point there though. Get outside help while you learn. So again, if you go back to the example of training, if you give people training and then expect them to produce an accessible product, they won't be able to. It's not fair to expect them to. So you're going to need some outside help in the interim. So a lot of agencies these days, they'll work with an outside accessibility agency like Dig or someone else. And that is because they don't have the confidence that their internal team have all the knowledge that they need to make something accessible yet. So get outside help while your team are learning how to make something accessible. So, and I'm not talking about the end of the project. Accessibility is always left until the end of the project. I'm saying, at the design stage, wireframe, discovery stages, all through that project, you want to be talking to somebody inside or outside your organization that knows about accessibility and knows how to deliver it. Gauge improvement over time. So you want to know that the result of your training is that more of your products are accessible and they're more accessible. So we'll get onto that slide in a little bit, but that measurement of accessibility success is, in a sense, a measurement of how effective your training is too. Test and measure, know that you're getting better. So we work with a lot of organizations. Let me roll back a little bit. Historically, when we used to do accessibility testing, probably only 10 years ago, we would produce lots of spreadsheets. So within those spreadsheets, we'd have all the guidelines in the first column, and then we'd have all the pages across the top row. And we would meticulously check that every one of the piece of content within that web page or that web application met the guideline that it was being measured against to. In fact, we still do it. That's still what we do. But the result of that was that we generate lots and lots of spreadsheets, and then we'd want to explain what the issues are in those spreadsheets. So we'd create another separate Word document, and we would detail all the different issues in there and provide the solutions for it. Now, fundamentally, what we do is still the same, but we do it within an application called Hugger, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But essentially, what I'm trying to describe here is that if you're an organization that's got lots of different products, or you're testing multiple products over a length of time, you're going to have, under the old way that we used to do it, and lots of agencies still do it that way, you're going to have a lot of data. They're going to be spreadsheets in folders or in emails and things like that. All I'm saying is you just need a good way of keeping track of all of that. So you need to be organized. You need to know where all your tests are, because you need to know that you're getting better over time, so that the work that you're putting in now results in better, more accessible products over the long term. So test and measure. So not just test to see if it passes. Test, measure those results against the results that you had previously and make sure that they're better, that you're going in the right direction. If not, you can tweak your training. You can maybe give your team more time to tackle accessibility issues. That's all often a problem with accessibility, often because it's left to at the end of the project, is that people don't feel like they have enough time to correct things. So make sure that you measure in this, make sure that you know you're doing better than you did before. So if I were to ask you now, if you've had several accessibility tests in the past, how do you know that you're better now than you were before? And the only way that you can do that is through comparison. So get a baseline measurement and track improvement. So if you're new to accessibility, you want to be thinking about getting a test around now. And a quick word on testing, it needs to be a manual test. So what I mean by that is that there's a lot of tools out there that will say that they will test for accessibility. We use those tools. They're very helpful. They help us, but they only tell about 30% of the picture. So there's 70% of accessibility that's not dealt with by these accessibility testing tools, not even the AI ones. In fact, you could argue they're worse because they make things up. So make sure that that you've got a good baseline, that you're testing manually, work with an agency to get your first test so you know exactly where you are with accessibility testing, know the errors that you've been making, your team can learn from those and they can get better. Test regularly. So how often should you test? I would say that anytime you've got a new product, you need to, that roadmap that I showed in like slide 2 or 3, you need to make sure that you're doing that for everything that you develop. And if you've got a product that's out there in the wild and it's being changed and updated and improved, then make sure that you test that after each bank of improvement. So every time you change something, then make sure that you go through another test. And that's because a very accessible user journey can end with a continue button that's not keyboard accessible or can't be picked up by a screen reader or has really bad color contrast. That'll mean that your users will have gone through an entire journey before finding something that's inaccessible. So make sure that you just test regularly. Make sure that you're not introducing little tiny things into your user journeys that are just going to interrupt the user and mean that they can't finish that journey. Use tools that make it easy for you to track audit results over time. So we talked about that. I'd recommend using Hugger, but I would because we built it. And if anybody wants a demonstration of that, just let me know. It's not really meant to be a sales pitch. I'm just saying that use the tools that will give you the best results over time and make sure that you can track what you're doing. Don't rely on third parties. Make sure that you do it in-house too. So third parties like Dig Inclusion, this is what we do. It's our bread and butter work, testing for accessibility and helping with accessibility. But make sure that your testing happens in-house. And there's lots of different benefits for that. One is that when we come to test later on, we'll find that there are far less problems if you've been doing accessibility testing in the house, if you've been doing it well. The other thing is that, coming back to the idea of an inclusive culture, if your team are learning about accessibility, one of the best ways to do that is to test and to find out, what is this problem? Does it meet this guideline? What does this guideline say? What are the nuances of that? That is the absolute best way to learn about accessibility, is just by doing it. So testing in-house, remediating in-house without help is really, really helpful. But of course, you're going to need to use third parties as well from time to time. Okay, just wanted to show you a screen of Hugger. This is a screen from a live test. I say live test, historic test, and it just gives you a dashboard of what's happening with the state of this current product. So we can see here that we got different levels of severity for the test, which helps with prioritization, the number of instances in total, and you can use a dashboard like this or any other dashboard from any other product that does this. It might be Jira or something else, to take these numbers and just compare them with what you had before. Okay, expect challenges because nothing is as simple as it sounds. One of my favorite box sets is series on Amazon Prime called Patriots, and there's a character in there, John Lakeman. I don't know if any of you've seen it, and he's like a special ops guy, CIA agent, and all he's got to do, or all he's been asked to do, is take some money from A to B. And his comment is, it's never that easy, because it is never that easy. And they get 2 seasons out of it because it's not that easy. So expect challenges. It's very easy to say, let's make it accessible, or just set it as a requirement. But the reality is that it's not that easy, and things will go wrong, things that you wouldn't expect. We worked with a football club. I won't say who they are, but they were very dedicated to accessibility. They had a good budget. They had a good culture internally, but they were working with third parties who maybe didn't share that culture. And one of the things that they found is that everything that they produced in-house was great. It was accessible. Anything that they relied on a third party for was of dubious accessible quality. And some of the third party tools were very well known tools used everywhere. And they'd taken on contracts with these agencies, believing that they were accessible because they were told that those products were accessible. And when it came to our test, we found that there were the holes in these products. And that was very disappointing for everybody. It was disappointing for us because we wanted, this club to have a fully compliant site. The club themselves really wanted to have a fully compliant site, but they were let down by this third party. And this third party really struggled to make the changes that were required. So those things are going to happen. You can mitigate a lot of those things just by having good contracts. So if you've got good contracts in place that say, this product needs to be accessible, it needs to be compliant to the latest WCAG regulations, penalties for not doing so is that, you have to remediate these faults and do retests at your own expense. Things like that within a contract, make sure that when it comes to a problem with a product that you've told is accessible, told to be accessible, they can't just come back and say, oh, well, we tested it with screen readers, or that we didn't really know what you meant, or it's a vagary. Lock things down. Make sure when you're talking about accessibility within procurement that it's a very clear requirement for them, and they know what they need to do, they know what they need to deliver, and that they're not going to drop the ball and leave you with a product that's not as accessible as you wanted. So expect these challenges. They will come up no matter how much you prepare. They're going to come up anyway, but put the odds in your favor by having good contracts. So remember, nothing is as simple as it sounds. Accessibility is complicated. Accessibility is hard. You can't just do it. You can't just deliver it. You can't just make it. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes learning. Control what you can, learn from what you can't. So in that example that I gave of the football club, they were controlling everything that they could. When it came to the product from the third party, they couldn't do anything about it, but they learned. They learned that in the future that they need to have tighter contracts. They did learn a workaround in the end, and they were ready for that. So if anything came up like that next time, it wouldn't be so bruising. And reduce challenges by having solid supplier contracts. So I'm not going to go over that again, but yeah, it's so critical. I am going to go over it again because I've just thought of another example where just recently this week I was talking to another client frustrated about suppliers not providing accessible work because it's just not required in their contract. So make sure that accessibility is in your contract. Go and have a word with procurement. You'll be amazed at how many organizations just don't have a requirement at all, or that the requirement is very loose and people, aren't held to account. You need accountable within your organizations with accessibility, just like you do with other things. For example, security, you would not hold someone accountable for security measures within your digital products. And that is it. So I just want to talk about the next webinar. So the registration's open now. So if you want to go and look at that bit.ly link, you can go and sign up for the next webinar where I'm talking about accessibility's hidden pitfalls. So I've covered today about the accessibility roadmap. What I want to do over the next few sessions is to start highlighting the details of how to make things more accessible. So accessibility hidden pitfalls, we'll be talking about things where they're very common. We see them a lot within testing, and we want to help you avoid those and just give you a little bit of a heads up. So that's on Wednesday, 30th of October at 12 noon. And that's it. We're ready for Q&A. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
We've had a couple in, Grant, while you were talking there. If anybody has any questions, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom, by the way, to ask them. So one has come in. When accessibility improvements seem less tangible than other product enhancements, what's the best way for us to get senior leadership on side?
Oh, that's great. That's great. I would say user testing with people with disabilities. So one of the most effective things you can do. So we've got Ksenia, who works at Dig Inclusion. She's blind. She uses a screen reader. She absolutely loves going to other organizations and giving a demo of her software. So for those who don't know what a screen reader is, it's a piece of software that sits on a laptop or a mobile phone, and it speaks to the user because they can't see the screen, or they can't see the screen very well. It'll speak to the user and tell them what's on the screen, and it'll tell them whether something's a link, a button, a heading, and all those sorts of meta details as well. So Ksenia likes going into organizations and demonstrating that because there's a response. There's a response where people look at what Ksenia's doing, and you can see the shock on their faces sometimes, because they never expected their product to be that bad or to behave the way that it did. Or flip side, if you've really done a great job, Ksenia will find little or no resistance with that application. She'll get through it quickly, and she'll be able to tell you that that's a rare event, because it is. So if you want to get leadership buy-in, we can certainly arrange something like that for you, for Ksenia to come and visit you and show you what your own products look like. I mean, you have to take a deep breath before you do something like that, because it is a bit scary, and you're going to find out some stuff. But yeah, if you want to get leadership buy-in, that's a really good way to do it. Or organize your own. There are agencies out there that will do user testing. There's one called Fable, I think, which is American. So if you're based in America, that might be first protocol. But yeah, we have disabled users at Dig. We don't kind of sell it as a disabled user testing service. But if you have a test with us, that's kind of what you get then. But really, on what we're really doing is testing to regulations, making sure that that you meet the regulations. On top of that, and apart from that, you need to be doing user testing to see what that experience is like. So that's what I would say to us is, yeah, do some user testing.
Cool. Had a question from Mark. Great to see you, Grant. I know you have mentioned that AI is not great at the moment for accessibility assessments. Do you see a point in the future where we could leverage advancements in that space?
Yeah, probably. I would say so. And it's not just accessibility, it's going to be everything, isn't it? The timeline's a bit difficult on it, though. I remember saying that probably 4 years ago. I remember being in an event and making the statement that AI will be doing accessibility testing in 2 to 3 years. So I was maybe out by a decade by the time it actually comes around to do accessibility testing. But it will come. I think it'll look different as well. I think that one of the most obvious uses of AI in that space is just to have browsers or assistive technologies that can recognize a component that's inaccessible and just give the user the accessible version of it. So say you've got an image without an alt attribute, then maybe you'll be able to describe the image to you intelligently. They do it now, so AI can describe an image to you, and there are some tools out there, the professor can fix your site using AI, but they don't really understand what the image is for. They're just describing what it is. And sometimes the image that we're looking at isn't is doing a different purpose to how it looks. For example, a play button. It's not a white triangle in a red rectangle. It's a play button. But some AI might get things like that wrong. So yeah, I do see a part for AI in the future. The time scale it's just really hard to say. And I don't think that the best use of it is accessibility testing. It's probably accessibility fixing, I would say, through the browser or through tools, sort of super screen readers that can assess what's meant to happen and fix it. And it's nice to hear from you, Mark. We should catch up.
Cool. Sounds like a possible future session for us as well on AI.
Yeah.
Marco is asking, can we share the presentation? Yes, we'll share a recording of this entire session with you afterwards. Let's have one final question here. So James is asking, we don't have an established accessibility program yet. Should we be trying to involve users with disabilities in the design process? And what's the best way to get them involved?
Yeah. So there is, you can use Fable, or you can go to, and I'm saying use Fable. I've seen it. I've seen a demo of it. I haven't actually used it, so I don't know what the customer experience is like with it. But to me, it looks like something that's got potential. So it's definitely worth looking at. If you know people with disabilities, if you've got people with disabilities within your organization, I would say go there first, get them involved in the project. And there are some teams, I know Mark has a team where there's a high concentration on disability within that organization, and there's a club. There's a club of people who have a focus on disability and on making sure that everybody knows what they're doing. Their accessibility is part of the conversation. A lot like what I was talking about earlier. There's a culture, and I think installing something like that is incredibly helpful.
Cool. Okay, thank you everyone for attending. You should get pinged a feedback form at the end of this. So if you could fill that out, that would really help us. And as I say, we'll share the link to the next webinar, as well as that feedback form with you and the recording very soon. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye, and good luck.